Ruler School is brought to you by Odyssey Games, where you can go to get singles for all your Force of Will and other trading card games, as well as these amazing patrons. Thank you for your support. Enjoy the video.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Tournament Report. This is Paul, and today we're going to be talking over the last two GPs that happened over in Europe, in Padova and in Paris. Last week was my spring break, so I took the week off to sort of just relax and chill during my time at graduate school. So this week you're going to be getting the double dose of Padova and Paris's GP season. So without further ado, we're going to get right into the ruler breakdown for GP Padova. And there was about 100 players there, which is a pretty substantial amount. And as you can see here, the format has been pretty well warped in Lucifer and Hanzo's favor, with 28 and 26 players playing those decks specifically. And then about 18 Brunhildes, 17 Gills, which is frankly a lot of Gills. 12 Ayu, which is interesting because we haven't seen a lot of Ayu lately, although she's been around. And then of course 10 Kirik and about 6 other rulers that were just sort of there. They were just minor amounts of rulers, and so they weren't necessarily in the top 8 or even in the top cut in general, so we didn't include them in this video. But in Paris, you're going to see a substantial drop off. So there was more of a spread when it comes down to other rulers that were played as opposed to Lucifer, Hanzo, and Brunhild. A lot of Gills dropped off too, so there were only 18 Lucifers and Brunhilds respectively. And then 17 Hanzos, 10 Kirik, which is the same as the last GP that happened in Padova. And then we lost about 10 Gills, and we gained 4 Loki, and we had a huge drop off in terms of Ayu as well, all in favor of 15 other rulers that didn't even place. So it's interesting how the meta is shaping here. It seems like there were just more people who were able to make this GP that wanted to play some other rulers instead of some of the more popular rulers like Lucifer, Brunhild, Hanzo, Gil, etc. So what we're seeing here is this is a more diverse meta in Paris, but you're going to see some very similar results. So now we're going to move right into the list from GP Padova that won, and of course it's Federico Zoppini on Gil. Now this is not something new for Federico Zoppini. He's won a lot of tournaments with Gil, but one of the things you're going to notice about the list that he's playing right now and the list going forward is that a lot of the meta has been really well shaped by Gil, Hanzo, Brunhild, Lucifer, and some form of aggro deck. More than likely it's going to be Kirik more often than not, with some minor rulers getting some placements some of the time, things like Loki machines or Hanzo machines, and then some other variations of deck out east in Singapore and places like that. But for the most part, the meta is pretty well formed. It's those 5 rulers: Gil, Lucifer, Brunhild, Hanzo, and some form of aggro deck, which is more than likely going to be Kirik 80% of the time, if not more. So what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking about some of the more nuanced choices that players like Federico were making to their decks in order to anticipate the next, the kind of meta they were going into. And one of the interesting things about Federico Zoppini is that he chose to play the Leaf Fairy, which is not something we've seen a lot of in Gil lists, but what this ultimately does is it gives you a flyer that cantrips when it comes into the field, but more than that, it gives you elementals for the Leaf Assassin, which is also a card we haven't seen a lot of lately. People have been opting to play some other cards over Leaf Assassin, but this is a really good way of getting rid of some things on the field if you don't have 5th element in hand. And it does a little bit less, but if you have a ton of elementals in hand, which you should with Leaf Paladin, the blue, black, white, and red leaves in your hand, as well as all the other cards in your hand that count as elementals, and you have a ton in this list, the Leaf Assassin can potentially do a ton of damage and get rid of some pretty troublesome resonators on your opponent's side of the field. So this is a really good card combination, and I think Leaf Fairy in general is one of those things we just sort of overlooked for other cards that we considered to be better for the meta at the time. And what's really cool about that is you're starting to see Leaf Fairy and other sort of obscure cards make it into main boards, which really tells me the health of the game, because we're overlooking these other cards because there's other more powerful cards that we could be choosing instead, but now we're going back to these other cards we didn't really give a second glance to and giving them that second glance, and all of a sudden, wow, these things are actually pretty darn decent. So not only does this thing fuel your Leaf Assassin and your 5th element, but it also just fuels, it's a little bit more card draw, it's a way of getting in some flying damage, and it's a really good way of just you know, continuing to put pressure on your opponent in a different kind of meta. In addition to that, we're going to go into the sideboard now, because pretty much everything else on the list is the same, and if there is anything different, it's going to be in the side package. One of those cards is Sealing the Gates of Darkness. So this card is really great because this is basically a quick cast Blade of Faith for things like Joan of Arc. Now, it only works on Darkness Resonators, but that's really the only Resonator you really care about is Joan of Arc, or potentially Ray the Black Owl if you're really worried about that card. It's worth bringing in this card. Gil just has a lot of trouble playing against black, and these are the two trouble cards that are kind of an issue for the deck in general. But he also plays Gil Lapis in the sideboard, and I'd be interested to learn his reasoning for this. I ultimately just see this as a means of, you know, freeing up space in the main board for some things like Fifth Element or Leaf Fairy for some reason. Why he took this out of the main board, I'm not necessarily sure, but I think he was trying to go in a different direction with the deck, and it ended up working for him. Especially if they were starting to play against things like Keurig and they were just kind of getting blown out of the water by aggro. Putting this in the sideboard kind of frees you up to have some more blockers, or potentially have some different ways of doing removal with Fifth Element and Leaf Assassin, so that way you don't lose to aggro quite so much. So I can kind of see why you would want to put this in the sideboard, and I mean, it's okay. It works. Apparently it works because it got first place, right? So we're going to keep moving on here, and we're going to be talking about Squall of the Tengu. I can barely read that lettering, but there it is. And as a quick cast, just blow up all of the flying Resonators on the field for 3, which is pretty darn decent, especially if you're up against Karuras, or if your opponent is like, hey, I'm going to give something flying with Viola, or I'm going to put a bunch of flyers on the board, and you can just blow them up for 3, which is, you know, really nice, and you can search it out with Gil, so it all works out. Congratulations to Frederico for winning, and then we're going to keep moving on here, and we're going to be looking at Antonio's list for his Hanzo. Now, one of the main things that I thought was really cool in this Hanzo list was actually the inclusion of Chimimi in the side package. So Chimimi in general is not bad in this list. She still does fun things when you flip her, and she gives +4/+4 to the board. Of course, you don't get access to your Sealing Scroll, but that's not that big of a deal, especially if you're going against aggro. Sealing Scroll against Keurig is completely useless, so everything else works still, so you might as well side Chimimi, give her everything +4/+4, especially those Jizo statues, which are already huge to begin with, or even your Mikes or your Fairy of the Lost Isles, some +4/+4 later in the game. That's really great. Closes out game, she's really great for that. Aggro is really solid, but what I think is more important about this card's inclusion in the sideboard is this card. Now, you might recognize this from, you know, my recent playthrough, Chimimi versus Hanzo at our recent feature match between me and Jeremy. And this card is actually really good. Of course, you need to control a Mimi tribe in order to play it. It says Mimi tribe, not Mimi tribe Resonator, so that's really important to make note of. Is you can include this card, and for 4 you can start wiping the board with this really powerful Resonator that can just kill things for 12. And if you have a bunch of Resonators on the field and you need to pump it, you definitely can for that secondary effect, the +2/+2 until end of turn. That's pretty decent as well. It comes in with swiftness and precision. It's a really solid card just for doing some spot removal, especially against opposing Gillapi. Gillapi, I guess, is the plural for Gilapis. Anyway, we're just not even gonna go in there. This card is awesome. I love it. It's a really good aggressive card, and I'm glad it's in the sideboard package. Other than that, there's not that much to talk about other than, you know, just some agony in the main boards. Really, again, these decks are just being tacked out to sort of deal with the meta as they see it, as they see the meta going into a field full of Lucifers and Gills and stuff like that. So I think the sideboard package was really where this deck shines. A couple Rachels as well is pretty interesting to sort of limit your opponent's tempo in the long run. It's a basic Hanzo quick cast list, so we're just going to keep going. And then next up we have the only Brunhild that topped both GPs. This is the only Brunhild, so that's really fascinating to me. How this is the only one, but for the most part there's not much going on here. Again, all of these decks have been primed, all of them have been figured out for the most part and honed pretty darn well. And one of the main things I wanted to highlight here is Bethor being used as a means of just drawing a card if it dies, and then you can always bring it back with the air combo, which is really great. So it's just a 5/5 flyer. It's just really nice for getting in and poking some damage. It's also really good to use with the protection of the fairies, or protection of the angels, I guess I should say. That's a completely different card. Protection of the angels is really strong with this as well. If your opponent's trying to kill it, you can just block it. You can block whatever they're trying to do, especially if it has flying. You can just block it with protection of the fairy, protection of the angels, and just kill it raw fright. So that's really useful. And then of course you have White Leaf. That's just a way for you to deal with aggro, gain life, and of course if you end up playing your Mistletoe, you can just bring back White Leaf. And it's actually a respectable body. It's an 8/8 body. It's not bad at all. And then if you need to banish it, you gain even more life. So Mistletoe with White Leaf is definitely a combo you can do. Although it's not necessarily the most optimal combo you need to do. It's just something you can do game one if you need to. And then of course in the side package there's just Wrath effects. Resuscitating Will is very interesting. If you saw the most recent Teacher's Lounge, it's a good card to play, especially if you have the ability to just sort of swing in multiple times. It's really good for that reason. If you have Brunhild, you can flip, get something back, next turn attack in for 12 in the air, Resuscitating Will, swing again for game. That's pretty darn good. It's not a bad combo at all. And some decks that don't have interaction with J-Rulers really have issues with that. So congratulations to Stefano for getting the top placement. And then we're going to move on to the next GP, which is in GP Paris. And Philip Kybuor's got the win with Gil once again. So this Gil is going to be a little bit different. Of course, you see the things like the Leaf Fairy and the Leaf Assassin to sort of deal with the aggro. You're going to see that these cards in the top right corner. These are also elemental, Gentle Breeze elementals. I can't remember the name every single time. It's just the one that you drop a quick cast and you get cantrips and it gives you a card, which is really nice. But it also fuels Gil. There's just two different arts because of the release of this card. One of the main things you're going to want to notice in the side package, though, is Reincarnation of the Soul, which is actually really cool. So the thing that you can do with this in the mirror match is you can play this card alongside Gil Lapis, Inheritor of the Stars. And what you can do is you can remove an elemental with Gil Lapis, get a +1/+1 counter on him, float a White Will, and then if you have Gil already flipped as well, you can remove another elemental, generate 2 Will that can only be used for Spirit Magics, play this card, recycle whatever was put into the remove from play by both of these, well, Gil Lapis and then Gil, and then of course you're already up a Will, so which is pretty nice, and then you have a +1/+1 counter on Gil, Inheritor of the Stars, which is interesting, and then you draw a card. So you're up a Will, you're up a card. So if you're trying to like loop your opponent, that's pretty nice, and then it's a Spirit Magic, so you can always remove it with Gil. I'm sorry, not with Gil, with Lorite. Recycle it back in with a second reincarnation, and then you just have that nice little loop going, and it's a good way of just sort of keeping your resources to yourself in the mirror match, which is really solid. The second card we're going to want to look at today is Blooded Winds. Now this might look familiar. It's basically Jet Blackwings, but it's in the form of a chant. And it's not quick cast, so they can't cancel it with Favor Spell or anything like that. But the cool thing you need to know about Blooded Winds is one of the other effects of Gil Lapis is that he puts mystery counters on your J/ruler. So if you have access to Blooded Winds, you can just remove a mystery counter from your J-Ruler, and then you just -6 their side of the board, which is pretty solid. So it's just a nice way of doing -6 to the board. It allows your Leaf Assassins to go a lot further. It also means that your opponents are going to have a harder time blocking and, you know, killing your Resonators in response. So this is a really great way of just ensuring that you have access to, you know, at least minusing, if not board wiping them completely. And the card's just really solid, and of course you played the 1 Darkness Stone, so you're able to do that without much of an issue. So congratulations to Philip. I like the deck a lot. It looks really interesting, and this, if you're trying to get into Gil, this is probably a good starter deck to sort of put together and see what's going on. Gil's just a good ruler right now, so play Gil if you want to. And then we're going to move on to Taylor's IU list, and we have to mention IU because it actually got 2nd place. And one of the things you need to understand about Ayu is that it's really good against control decks like Gil. Gil cannot block Ayu. And you're going to say, well, why? I mean, Ayu is clearly smaller than Gil. And that the simple issue is that you can just pitch a soul and then Ayu just kills Gil outright. And then of course she gains all those symbol skills, which is really nice. And then she can just win the game outright and you didn't see it coming. So she's really good against Gil. Because Gil doesn't always have the ability to interact with Ayu. And even if he does end up killing her, she is imperishable. So she can just come right back. One of the rulers that might have you might think might have a better time against Ayu is Hanzo. And we want to talk about Hanzo because he has things, he has access to things like Viola to give things flying, so he can, you know, have resonators that block Ayu. But one of the most important cards in the deck that I noticed was Lightning Cave. Now, Lightning Cave, I think, is an amazing addition. It's one of the best additions in the game because it removes flying and swiftness from things that aren't blue. And that includes J slash resonators. So that's really, really great. So if you play Lightning Cave and you flip Ayu, there's literally nothing Hanzo can do to stop you from swinging in for game with flying. He can't give himself flying, he can't give his other resonators flying with Viola. There's just things he can't do. So I think that's really great, and I think Lightning Cave is very clutch. And just want to say congratulations to Taylor. He got second place with this list. It's really cool looking. If you haven't seen an Ayu list for the current format, this is a really good one to look at. So definitely look at it carefully. The link is down in the description. Don't forget that. Next up, we haven't talked about Lucifer at all, so I decided to put in Sergio's and Heiko's list in this list of different decks that we've seen in GP Paris. These are really similar lists for the most part. They're this strange mid-range aggro thing that Lucifer can do because of the way black works with things like March of the Dead and Look of Corruption, Glint, those sorts of things. And of course, with access to the Nullstone, he can play things like Majin Dark Elf to get in some quick early damage turn 1, and then have a bunch of small resonators to pump up Joan d'Arc, which is one of the best cards in the deck, if not the best card in the deck. And then of course, at least Heiko is playing the Lich sideboard, which, you know, if you don't know what that's for, we talked about it last video. It's basically for you to get a free early flip and be able to do some pretty crazy stuff. It has Bane too, so that's really great if you're having issues with Gil. In that matchup, you can flip Lich, and then it has Bane, which is basically Death Touch from Magic, and then it just kills Gil or whatever else has Barrier. So it's a really good way of giving all of your black resonators access to a way to just straight up kill anything that they run into. So it's pretty great. It's a really good anti-aggro card as well. So, and it flips early, which is really nice. So the only other thing I need to mention is that Heiko for some reason doesn't have a 5th card in the rune deck. We don't know. I don't know what that card is. I just assumed that he was playing some other card there because you can only have 0 or 5 runes. So that's just the way it is. So there you go. These are the 2 lists for Lucifer. They're also really good lists for you to just sort of look at, tech out. I would say like the Faith and Darkness over here in Sergio's list isn't necessarily something you have to run, but it is kind of nice. You can play with the amount of glints if you would like as well. Dark Riding Hood isn't necessarily something you have to have, but if you're playing mystery counters and you're playing Gills, sorry, not Gills, but Grims in the sideboard, this is a good combination. In general, you can play around with Lucifer, but they're all pretty much figured out at this point. The mid-range aggro build is pretty much the way to go, and if you end up going late, you have Astemas, and you also have Belials to blow up the field and cinch the game for yourself pretty much. So congratulations to these 2 for getting into the top 4 in Paris. And now we're going to move on to my thoughts at how the meta is shaping up currently. Now, if you remember last video, this is kind of the way I thought the meta was shaping up so far, and you know, that hasn't changed too much. We're not going to see as much machines, but Hanzo tends to be the thing that people are playing a little bit more of. Brunhild has not had that much of a success, but Lucifer, Gil, and Hanzo are probably the 2, or wow, 3. 1, 2, 3, can't count right now, but these are the 3 rulers that we saw the most in the top 8. So that would suggest that these other 2 rulers, pretty much any aggro ruler probably is going to be Keurig, and then Brunhild are the 2 underdogs currently. So they're going to have to adapt, and if Lucifer wants to top another GP, it's also going to have to adapt a little bit, which is pretty great to think about because spoiler season just recently started apparently. So we got 4 new cards to look at, and one of the best ones for me anyway was the new blue spell that gets rid of quick cast. So there's some really interesting stuff coming out for the 3rd set. But for the takeaway today, what are your hopes for the spoiler season? Now, I really like the new blue card that came out that gets rid of quick cast. That's pretty solid. But what I really want to see, more than anything, I just hope that we get some decent cards that make Adam Sykart, Fushi, Isis, Loki specifically, and some other unseen rulers. Shayla, of course. If you know me, you know I love Shayla. I want to see more Shayla in the meta. But these unsung rulers that just don't really have a lot of play, don't have a lot of direction right now, I just want to see some actual, like, decent support for them. Because we got some decent white support in Mistletoe, we got some decent black support in Athenia, but we're just not seeing a lot of these other rulers that we could be playing. We are only seeing things like Brunhild and Hanzo and, you know, Keurig and Gil. I want more in the meta. I want more diversity. I want some of these other really cool rulers with really cool effects to actually have some payoff attached to them. So let me know what you think down in the comment section down below. While you're down there, hit subscribe and ring the bell. And of course, check this channel out for things like weekly feature matches, the Teachers Lounge podcast, deck profiles, and other tournament reports coming up later in the season for the GPs. And it's been a pleasure. I enjoyed this. Have a good day. And as always, we'll see you next time.